I am joined today by Brian Wilson, who is the developer of Where the Bees Make Honey, which is the game we're going to be talking about today in this interview. So thank you for taking some time to talk with us, Brian.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, a pleasure to have you here. We met at PAX East. I have
Yep.
since that crazy hectic weekend had the time to sit down with the game, explore it a bit. So I've got some questions I can't wait to pick your brain about.
Perfect.
But first, for anybody stumbling upon this interview that doesn't know what Where the Bees Make Honey is, why don't you give us the pitch?
Right. So, Where the Bees Make Honey is a narrative puzzle experimental game. It tells a story about this woman named Sunny, who's ultimately at a crossroads at her dead end office job. And during that time, she's looking back at old pictures of her childhood, and you get to play those memories.
Very succinct and gets right to it. Um, First and foremost, I have to imagine that there is a story behind making a game about this kind of so specific an emotional experience. I mean, you don't see that many games that dive into something so specific and so poignant that so many people can relate to. So what was the impetus? What kind of sparked you to make this game?
Yeah, there's a there's a few parts to that. I think the first part was that it was the first game I ever started to make
Mm-hmm.
ever. Or at least successfully, like actually had something to show. And that core mechanic was kind of these rotational puzzle levels.
Mm-hmm.
Those levels came first. Basically, when I was learning how to 3D model, I wanted to just have something more to the level that you couldn't see. Maybe like a door on the other side or something that would be like, okay, that's such a like, it's rather like small, but I can accomplish that.
Mm-hmm.
Other than like I'm gonna make a ninja MMO, and it's like that's never gonna happen, right?
Small
So
scale is a good thing to shoot for in a first game for
step
sure.
one, right? So that came first, and that obviously has stuck throughout the game. The second part was the story. At least I had these ideas like about a year even before I even started making the game. So that would have been like 2016, and the story started like I never met either of my grandfathers growing up, at least as an adult, and I always felt like it's not that it ever really hurt, but it just never I never really had anything there,
Hmm.
and I wanted to use games to kind of maybe fill in that gap almost, or try to recreate any situation or scenario that's what it would have been like. And I think through games, because of the interactivity, that could be probably one of the closest things to have. And that's at least where it started. Obviously, the story changed.
Hmm.
And I like to say it changed because of the resources that I had. And it was ultimately like people who I knew could actually do the voiceover and I could actually work with for the story, because like I always wanted it to be this like grandfather figure. But then the more I thought about it, I was like, I don't know if I'm actually going to be able to like achieve this, rather than like just hope it would happen.
Hmm.
So kind of with all these other things within the game starting to wrap up, I it's almost just like you have all these like ingredients, and it's like when putting them together, it's more about creating reasons why. And ultimately, with these weird, dreamy puzzle levels and flashbacks, it was like, how can this make sense? And that's when more of the um, reflection aspect as an
Hmm.
adult came in, and that's just to be honest. Like it's not like there were light bulb moments, but it was more about like it's funny how much of it was in front of me and my co-writer the whole time, but we just had to like talk through it until we had that like realization that like, oh, she's like looking at pictures at her desk, and then that's when it was like, this is
That's where
starting
it
to
grew
click.
from.
Right.
That's cool. I don't often hear developers talking about kind of building a game from what they can do. It's more like having an idea and trimming it down to.
Mm,
And I'm sure that kind of plays into one of the questions I want to ask.
right.
Um, in that this is it, Where the Bees Make Honey is a fairly short game.
Right.
And there is all through the games, media and gamers, and this whole debate about, you know, oh, is it worth money for a short experience? In my personal opinion, not every game needs to be an 80+ hour experience.
Nope.
But I wanted to kind of pick your brain about that from kind of the perspective of a developer in building a short experience. Was that something that was kind of intentionally done in narrative? Because I felt when playing this that the shorter span gave it a little bit more punch. You know, I feel like if it was much longer than what it was, it might have started to overstay its welcome. And then, how have you dealt with what I'm sure you've gotten criticism from people about the length of the game, and I just having a developer's perspective on that I thought would be interesting.
Yeah, it's something I honestly thought about and still think about is, and especially in terms of, it's really unfair to do this, but I always compare my development cycle or me to AAA
Mm.
because I think about like how those lengthier games are planned out and paced, and some do better jobs than others. But that's definitely something I thought about often. Was like the game's going to be too short because originally it was just going to be like the 4 puzzle levels, with each one's a different season, maybe a little video at the beginning and video at the end. And then I signed with my publisher, Whitethorn Digital, almost exactly a year ago. And he didn't, like pressure me, but I just knew, I was like, okay, if we're actually going to like get on consoles and actually make this a real thing, like there just needs to be more.
Mm.
So that's where like the rest of the game really filled out. But even then, like it's really funny how long it would take me to make a level, and then it would be like a minute to get through it. Like the kitchen level, kind of where it like flips up and down.
Yeah.
But then like I spent all this time. I'm maybe not the best planner or producer for this, but and I like that level a lot. But it's like a minute, and it's like, where's the line between this? Is it worth it? Maybe length doesn't matter. I also think price is a big point.
Always a big debate about price to hours played,
Right. So like if my game was $15 or $20, I think people maybe would have felt like there should have been more. If it was too cheap, or the best thing people or consumers you would want them to kind of feel is like they're getting a steal or they're getting a good value out of it. But I don't know if we'll ever be able to like feel good about that, because then if it's like, if you have all that content, like, is it priced too cheap? Could you have sold it for more? I think that's that kind of thing where it's like you need to maybe trust other people and start to like take a step back and people you trust, or your publisher, other developers, and like get their opinion, because when you're so close to it, it's hard to kind of see those other aspects.
Yeah, and it's a hard thing to figure out. I don't think there's like one necessarily right answer to the whole thing. And in speaking about the kitchen level, I think that's actually a really good moment of the game to bring up, because I think that's a prime example where it flows so perfectly with what's going on with her reflections that it's just this small vignette moment. And if it was a longer thing, it wouldn't have been as impactful.
Right.
Something I wanted to at least get your opinion on, because I think it's something probably a lot of indies struggle with, that balance between length and what they want to accomplish. You mentioned earlier the puzzle mechanic, which is the other thing I really wanted to prick your brain about. In dealing with perspective, and there's a lot of the game that is about perspective. In many different meanings of that word, but there's a lot of you play with a lot of genres and animation styles throughout the course of the game, and I wondered if that was a challenge or if it was kind of an opportunity for you in having such a varied set of levels and animations and just the way you were doing things and telling the story.
Right. That was not I could not have predicted that the game turned out the way that it did. Um, so yeah, like I said, at least with starting with the puzzle levels first, um, I I really wanted those to be more like Rubik's cubes in
Mm.
all sense of directions initially, and then I was like, that's really hard. I don't know how to do that. And luckily, um, I was able just to take that one rotating, like, basically it's like a parent object. So it is just basically within those worlds, there's just a giant cube,
Mm.
but it's invisible and everything is parented within that cube. So they also rotate. So that's when I had that first working, that was like such a huge accomplishment. But then it was more so taking that rotational thing and putting that within elements of the world. So like in the winter one, um, there's like a little like cabin thing, and there's two parts to the ladder, and that too is just basically an invisible cube that's rotating. So sometimes it's not connected and sometimes it's connected. So that's when I really felt like, okay, I have something here. And in terms of the rest of the game, I think it's by the time I was honestly done with those puzzle levels, I was just, I felt like I put all my best ideas in them, and I didn't really, if I were to make more, they would have been, um, I don't know, forced, I guess. So it felt like this is what I wanted to make, and I did it, and I'm happy with it, and it's done, in a sense. So with the rest of the kinds of games, it's, part of me is like that was a really liberating, and it was good to have that creative freedom because I got to make exactly the kind of levels I wanted, or I got to make like 4 different kinds of game
Mm.
inside of it, so it always felt fresh,
Yeah.
which I think was the biggest thing. Like I was always just on to some new little different thing, but so it was mostly good until there are parts where I was like finishing to be content complete on the game by the end of December. So after PAX West, which was at the beginning of September, or yeah, end of December for content complete, beginning of September for PAX West, and I basically my publisher, I mapped out like how much I would have to do to hit this deadline, and which is never fun, and it was basically like 2 weeks from start to finish for the rest of the levels, and then the final level and videos and stuff, and a copious amount of work after that. But basically, it was like there those levels, the vignettes definitely took a quality hit,
Mm.
which I don't feel good about. And to be completely honest, they were I do like a lot of those levels, but like the Notorious Rabbit level, which people love and hate, and the Monster Truck level, and like basically I know that I was like, maybe if I just had more time,
Mm.
and so that was a bad feeling, but I had to do that in order to just hit this deadline, and we did. So it's weird to look back on that because it's like I'm not blaming anyone, but it wasn't a great feeling to know that these levels weren't of the same quality as the others.
Well, I mean, it's that's part of the process, right? And that's why we
Yeah.
like talking to devs, is finding out about this stuff, and we certainly appreciate your willingness to be honest about that process.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so moving from talking about kind of the specifics of the game, I'd love to know how you got your start in indie game development. You say that Where the Bees Make Honey is your first kind of full game, but
Yeah.
kind of what's your background?
Right. So I had a really, I don't know, mix of like college experiences, but I think as far as I'll go back was I had this moment where I was like, I did a year at university, and then I dropped out, and moved to Pittsburgh, which is like a major city in Western Pennsylvania. And I was like working at this coffee shop full time, which was terrible. and I had basically like video games have always been a part of my life, and different levels or like intensities throughout it.
Sure.
But at this time, it was definitely like a higher moment where I was just more involved and listening to podcasts and stuff, and like just being in it or feeling, and like I always wanted to do this, but I never knew how that was done. It always felt like it was too big of a gap to like try to do something.
Sure.
So like throughout high school, every time I'd like try to make a game, I'd like have no idea, and then I'd like be intimidated and just kind of like go away for a little bit. But there was this moment where I like found this degree the associate's degree I have, which is in game development and programming, and that's at the Community College of Pittsburgh. And that was like I was at work, and it just like saw this article about like things you should do if you're not in college. I'm like, perfect. There was like, it was like right next to a railroad, and I was like, how do you become a train conductor, and all these things. And like it somehow led me to the CCAC's website, and this is one of those like butterfly effect moments that I'll like always get freaked out about. But like across the top was like, what's new? And it was like the title of my degree, which is multimedia programming, simulation, and gaming. And I was like, I saw it and I was like, cool, I know, what's that? And then it just lined up perfectly with like, it was like the perfect step for me to like actually do this. I wanted to do it. The degree she was checking out, it seemed legit. I was already there, like living in this area. And it just like was like, oh, this is actually like, this is actually going to happen. So that was like my first huge major introduction. I mean, it was 2 years to like kind of be exposed to some of the different programs and programming languages. And that was like the first big like check. However, I've always felt like we did a lot of like just learning, but never actually any making. And so it was a lot about theory and
conceptual as opposed to actual practical.
Exactly. But it turns out, and we did a lot of like 3D modeling and animation and programming, but like, and we never actually made a game. So which my classmates, the class started from like 30, which is still rather small, to like only 2 of us graduated after these 2 years. It really just dwindled and went away, and there's a lot to that. But we were like, we just want to make a game. Like we just like, we're ready. We want to do this. We have all these like ideas, but we never like actually felt like we were doing it. So there was this last semester in the spring that it was like making a game in Unity and using our VR headset, which we're like, we've never done. We're like, this is great. It's going to be fun. And then the class got canceled. And our professor just like left or something. And you needed 4 students for a class to continue, and there were only 3 of us. So like this was going like terrible. So somehow the class, they were convinced that we needed to graduate so the class would go on. So it turned out it was just another animation class. But my point of all of this is that like during that time I like saved up and like got a new computer and like downloaded Unity, which is free. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to do it myself. And then that was the start of where the music came.
Indie spirit.
So, and it was like, and it took a long time, but yeah, that was just like, and it was because a little bit of that push, because I was like, you know what? I'm just going to do this because otherwise like, it's not going to happen. So that was the start.
Wow, that's a pretty cool story.
Yeah, that's
ups and downs, peaks and valleys.
Right. A lot like development too.
Yeah. You mentioned that games have kind of always been part of your life.
Yep.
What were some of the inspirations? The games that stood out?
So I think earliest on, like the Crash Bandicoot and Spyro series were like some of the first games I ever played, and then ever since, like there were games throughout then, but it wasn't until high school when indie games actually were like a thing. And it's funny because some people like hate this story, but I have a few friends that have the same story. Is when Indie Game the movie came out.
Yeah.
And on Netflix, and I was a senior in high school, and I remember watching that. And again, this was towards the same around the time when I was like in it, like I was like felt like I was really involved, as much as I am now. So it was just like perfect, where I was like, oh my god, I love all of this, but like I didn't know that was possible, and like I didn't even know it was a thing. And a lot of people didn't, especially within indie games, because that's the whole point of the movie.
Yeah, I think that's that movie was a real important thing for the indie game community becoming what it was. And it is.
So like watching that, and my favorite game is Fez, and
I saw you were playing that. You were playing that post-launch.
That was my my reward. It never goes away. But yeah, that was so like a lot of those things connected, and like I literally remember watching that movie and like buying Fez, Super Meat Boy, and The Witness, and like just being like, oh my god, it's like finding a new band or a new genre, and then just like you're just opened up to this whole like category, and it's exciting. Like you're just filled with like, I just want to like be exposed to all of it, and that was like the first huge motivation. So I owe a lot to that, and I watch that movie probably once every year, and it still holds up.
Cool. Final question we ask every dev we talk to is, what other indie game projects out there are you excited by or anticipating really enjoying? Be they recently released, work in progress, whatever. Just opportunity to shout out some other cool projects.
Yeah. So I think you talked to some of these people, or at least one of them. I have a list.
If they were at PAX, it's probably the case.
So I have Ida. I think that's Jacob Williams. Mm-hmm. I met him at E3. I think Armor Games is publishing that. A game called Dark, DARQ, by Unfold Games. Check that. All these are on Twitter. Also met them at E3. Black Future 88.
Oh, yeah. I saw that actually last year at PAX, and that looks fantastic.
Yeah. I actually, like, those first three games I met at my first ever showing, which was at an event called The Mix, which was at E3. And then the last one is She Dreams Elsewhere. I met Davion. I think actually all those games are solo devs as well, including myself, which is really funny. Not maybe a bit of a coincidence. Maybe, I mean, other people involved for sure. But and I met Davion, who's making She Dreams Elsewhere at GDC at the Mega booth, and we were near each other. And yeah, so I'm excited. No, none of them are out yet. So those are the ones that are like that kind of upcoming releases that I'm finally excited to play.
Fantastic. So, awesome. Those are some great ones for us to follow up with. We usually try to use those suggestions as our next interview to
you should talk to all those people.
I will certainly try my hardest. Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, Brian, thank you for taking the time to talk to us about Where the Bees Make Honey. The game is available now for anybody that's interested in some of what they're seeing in this interview. It's on Xbox, PS4, and on Steam, so go check it out.